Welcome, everyone. We're going to start right on time because there's a lot to discuss and a great panel. So I'm Mike Leitner. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs for the CU system. And COLTT is a program that runs underneath my office, the Office of Academic Affairs. And just as a shout out to COLTT and the people who have worked with it over the years, this year will be the 25th anniversary of COLTT. So that's very exciting from our perspective. So today you're not here to hear about me, you're here to hear about this and hear from this great panel. And I want to thank the folks who put it together, and a special shout out to Kate Miller for helping to pull it together and for hosting us today. Kate?
Thank you so much, Mike. I greatly appreciate that. It's wonderful to see all of you, your names and faces. I just wanted to extend a thank you as well for joining us today, what proves to be an illuminating discussion with our panelists. The first half will be just that, a Q&A with our panelists. And then the second half will be an opportunity for all of you to engage with the panelists as well. And if you should have a question, please feel free to utilize the chat functionality. And our chat guru extraordinaire, JC, will be monitoring the chat and help filter those questions to the top when it comes time for those to be answered. So with that, also try to remember to stay muted. And again, we will have time for us to unmute and to interact at about the half-hour mark. I would like now to have our panelists introduce themselves. So one, you can find them on the screen and see their faces, and two, so they have an opportunity to speak as well as we get things kicked off. So with that, I'm going to ask Kerry if she would kick us off in the introductions department. Kerry?
Hi, I'm Kerry Floyd. I'm at the University of Denver, and my current role is instructional designer.
Thank you, Kerry. I'm going to go to Dr. Avila, please.
Hello, my name is Sara Avila. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an instructor at CU Boulder, and I teach statistics, econometrics, environmental economics, and this semester intermediate microeconomics.
Thank you so much, Sara. Mandi?
Hi everyone, I'm Mandi Singleton. I'm at the University of Denver and I'm a teaching and learning specialist.
Thank you so much, Mandi. Chelsie, would you please introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Chelsie Ruge. I'm the Director of Instructional Design at the University of Denver's University College. It's our Continuing and Professional Studies department.
Wonderful, thank you, Chelsie. And Ben, could close out our introductions, please.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Benjamin Kohntopp. I'm at the University of Denver as well, and I'm an instructional designer.
Excellent. Well, those are our panelists. And what I'd like to do now is shift our focus to the questions that we have developed for our panelists. And these questions are based off of the series and the webinars that they did this past year at COLTT. So with that, Mandi, I wanted to start with you, and specifically what I'm thinking of is posing this question around taking a student-centered approach to teaching, to learning, and course design as well. And it was mentioned during your COLTT 2021 presentation titled A Pedagogy of Care in Online Learning, that at the center of learning and curiosity and risk-taking is care and belonging. And what I'd like to know is if you can walk us through how fostering a sense of belonging and kindness can increase student success.
Yes, thank you for that intro, Kate. So my colleague Nicolas and I, Nicolas couldn't be here today, but we gave this presentation on fostering pedagogy of care in the online learning classroom. So as a teaching and learning specialist at the University of Denver, we work more on the delivery side of courses at the University of Denver. And so Nicolas and I help instructors with our courses and in their delivery of the courses that we curate at University College. And I'm also an adjunct faculty at University College. My background is in K-12 education, and one of the big pushes that we had before I made the leap into higher ed was around social emotional learning in the classroom with students. And especially I worked in a very like sort of high needs school, and most of our students came from like they were, we had a high minority rate and also socioeconomic status. We had about an 80% free and reduced lunch rate. And so social emotional learning kind of became the center of what we did at our school, because these students we needed to create and foster this sense of belonging for our students, that they belonged in our classrooms, that they could contribute in our classrooms. And when I came into higher ed, Nicolas and I in our office would often have conversations about this, and how, especially during the pandemic when everything went online, how we were creating that same space for higher ed students as well, and even graduate students, because all students have that same basic need of being cared for and having that sense of belonging in a classroom. Because even in graduate students, a lot of them have some maybe imposter syndrome, I guess that we call it, that they think they don't belong in that space, or that, you know, they're afraid to be in that space. So as instructors, it is extremely important for you to create that sense of care and that sense of belonging with students in the classroom. So I've been playing around with this about how we curate and design our courses are very structured and very routine, which is great. It helps alleviate a lot of anxiety for students, but I think about often how we create that relationship space between instructors and students, especially in these online courses. And so one of the things that I do in my own course is in the introductory discussion where the students introduce themselves to each other, is I like to use a Padlet or some other type. There's even like ThingLink or a few other EdTech tools out there, that I ask the students to create a Padlet that's like a personal learning profile, and they can share pictures of themselves and their families and their hobbies and their pets. And I think it creates this space, and I do mine first. So I create that vulnerability, showing students like, you know, that personal side of you, that students share that about each other. And I feel like it creates a lot more discussion between students and between the instructor and the students as well. And it helps me think about the student as a person, like when we're interacting in the discussion boards, that I think about from their perspective, something that they've maybe shared in that initial introduction that helps just create that space where I'm like, hey, I you know, you introduced yourself to me, and I'm inviting you into the space because I think that's super important. Using student names is always extremely important. Showing that you care about what's going on in their lives, for instance, planning group discussions or any group activities. One very important thing I always tell my instructors is to pay attention to what time zone the students are in, because we have students from all over the country, and often we have a student in Florida and a student in California. And if you put them in the same group together, it is very difficult for them to be able to find time to work on their group project together. So we get responses a lot from students in the student evaluations that say, thank you so much for, you know, preemptively planning our groups around time zones, because that means you, like, they literally say that shows you really care about, you know, where I live and my space and my time. So just things like that are ways that you can create that sense of care and belonging for students in your classroom, that, you know, they deserve to be there. We respect your time and your space where you are. So these are things I think about. And one of the things that Nicolas and I talk about often is how we can fit these things into the design of our courses. And I really think that narrative needs to be flipped. This is my critical perspective of that, of in planning for the design of courses, we need to plan the design around the relationships and the belonging first, and then the content comes later.
Mandi, I really like how you outlined some steps that I think would be achievable today that one could implement in their course, and how those little details can mean a lot in building that sense of care and belonging and kindness. And then that desire perhaps to learn increases because there is that connection made between instructor and teacher, instructor and student, and even student to student as well. Any follow-up thoughts from the panelists? Wonderful. Well, Sara, I'd love to move on to you because I think it's an interesting paradox here between perhaps your perspective and then the great examples and suggestions that Mandi gave, in the sense that in your COLTT presentation titled "We Are Lucky to Have You," I liked how you talked about the economic discipline and words such as kindness, community, collaboration, connection, emotion, belonging may not be used, maybe very frequently or perhaps not at all. And so I'm curious, from your perspective as an economist and as an educator, what does the research say about care? And moreover, why should we care about care?
Absolutely. It's about 190 hours ago, 8 days ago, I presented the results of 5 semesters teaching statistics. 2 of those semesters, I used personalized emails, announcements that were trying to convey the following message. Student, just put the name, Chelsie, Benjamin, Ariel, Eleanor, Kerry. I see who you are and I value and respect you. I want to share this learning experience with you. And my co-author is right there listening, and she helped me analyze this information. Of course, the way to see students with the little information I had was to build upon the phrases they would share with me, like, oh, you're James, the student who loves skiing. You're Ron, the student who ended his relationship over Thanksgiving. You're Ethan, whose grandma died. You're Nick, the student who tried to qualify for the Olympics, and so on. Not surprisingly, when I use this intentional message system in announcement, emails, videos, students showed greater satisfaction with me and the course. However, they also got better grades in their exams. And when I presented these results to my colleagues at the economics annual conferences, they were not impressed. The main reviewer said, listen, if I was your student, I would not even read those messages. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes, let's hope most of the time, you know where you're standing. You're fine. Well, you're more than fine when you have financial certainty, when you know you will get paid by the end of the month, when you're healthy, your kids are healthy, you're publishing, you become the editor of a prestigious journal, you love your job, your family, you know who you are. However, what happens those days, those moments, those seasons when you feel inadequate, when you don't think you are enough, when you're not sure you'll ever be published, when you don't know if it's worth putting all this effort, when you're a student and you're not sure you want to be an economist anymore or a psychologist or whatnot? What happens when your worth, your place, your identity are being shaken because maybe you're the only woman in class, or your parents lost their jobs, or you've been sick for a month, or you don't even have a computer and everyone else is sharing about their vacations in Europe and the Bahamas, right? Well, at one point or another, even the most successful reviewer, student, will feel inadequate. And that day, the message that a professor who has 120 students addressing you in particular will make a difference. Your brain basically will get the cue that you're important. Of course, for that cue to work, it has to be genuine. You really need to feel cared. And this care is shown in how well you prepare your class, the feedback you give in their homeworks, but also in expressing with words that, Susan, I see who you are. I respect you. And I want you to be able to code in R. I want you to be able to run regressions. Well, the most striking evidence of the impact of caring, of course, is not in the economics journals, but it's in psychological journals. And I divide them into 2 main groups. One of them is the Pedagogy of Belonging, decades of research led by the belonging project from Stanford. Authors such as Claude Steele, Greg Walton, and Jeffrey Cohen have studied belonging interventions for a long time, and they know how they have an impact in student retention and even for a lifetime. And the other group is mostly a response from COVID. Like Mandi said, we started finding that this was necessary. And then these new, let's call it new research, are like Tim Pichil from the psychoeducational assessment that says, what are the characteristics of award-winning professors? And you find that one current theme is that they care for students. It's very hard to define what is this, but you can identify when it's not there, right? So basically, yeah, belonging, care matters. It has a repercussion in the satisfaction of students, in the satisfaction of professors, but also in grades.
Absolutely important to note too, Sara, that I like the word that you use, genuine, and that's something that I think can't be taught necessarily. It's there within someone to truly want to connect and to truly want to foster that sense of belonging. But then rooting that in research, I think, makes it that much more important and powerful to say that this matters. There is that focus on the content and the research and getting published and being well known and renowned in your particular area of expertise. But to make that connection with the student, to think that you could change or impact their world, I think is so absolutely empowering and powerful and meaningful on so many levels. So thank you for that. Chelsie, I appreciated the question that you posed during your presentation, of course, this summer at COLTT with Kerry and Ben, asking why does student choice matter? And why does it matter for learning? And this is an important question to ask, and it might feel overwhelming for some, I think too, not knowing where to start. How do I engage my students in that learning? How do I factor them in when I'm thinking about assessments and content building? So I'd really like to ask you more about that. And if you could expand on that, specifically, how do you make learning experiences personally meaningful and customizable to the student goals? What does that look like? Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, so as Mandi mentioned, there's the way you show up in the classroom, the way you invite students in, those relationships that you build. And as Sara was talking about, that genuine, authentic care and connection and how that impacts the outcomes for students. And that is critical. Without that, you have nothing. But you also want to set instructors up with the design of the course that's going to help them be successful. And as Mandi mentioned, you have to keep the end goal, create spaces when you're designing the course to have those meaningful relationships, to let students come into that conversation. So we're constantly thinking about that. We work really closely with the team Mandi's on. So Kerry and Ben are also on the design team at University College. And so we've been adjusting our practices a lot in order to put that front and center. And you hear so many buzzwords like make students co-creators of knowledge, choice, make content relevant. But what does that mean? How does that look? How can you actually make that happen in the design of the course? Even if you're not sort of separate, where you're like sort of doing a design that different instructors are going to teach and they show up in different ways, and you're kind of, maybe you're the sole faculty member who is both teaching and designing and redesigning as they teach. You still want to think about how can we form the content and the assignments and activities in a way that's going to create that space to show care and belonging. And one way is to, let students have some of the ownership, be partners with you in what they're getting out of that learning experience. One thing we just do in the design process generally is and Ben and Kerry have been super instrumental in changing this, is do a lot more visioning up front. who are the students? What kind of experiences are they coming with? How do we want them to be transformed 5 years from now? What kind of learning experience do you want to create? And brainstorming that too. You know, we used to just start with what are the learning outcomes? What's the content that has to go in this course, and then work back from there. But we also want to start with, okay, yes, what's the scope of the content in this course, but also what kind of learning environment and experience are we crafting? And then throughout the design, you have to keep coming back to that. You know, how do we, is this activity, you know, giving students options, is limiting the way that they can interact, and you know, is this an opportunity for students to truly learn from one another and bring them their whole selves to the classroom? So I wanted to share just one example of one class. I know it's always helpful to have you know, some concrete examples. So one course we're doing, it is an instructional design course. So we're actually teaching students instructional design. So forced us to be really reflective of our own practices while we're going through it. But one thing, and Kerry's been great at sort of blazing the way on goal setting for students, and having students at the very beginning of the class look at, okay, here's the learning outcomes for the class, but what do I need to get out of it? What do I care most about? What are my values and my goals with relation to this? What questions do I have that I want to get answered in this class? And we have some, like Kerry's been doing a lot of Padlet, you know, sort of like a virtual like pegboard kind of thing where students can visualize that. But even just asking that. And so in this instructional design course, you know, some students might say, oh, I'm really interested in like technologies or the evolving online space or inclusivity and DEI, and you know, so we'll make sure that we can give them space to unpack those questions. And then just as you get into instructional design, there's so many different approaches and philosophies to teaching that there's more iterative and linear, and it's constantly evolving. You know, there's rubrics as an equity practice, but also ungrading as an equity practice. Which one, you know, in which states? And there's so much debate. So, and it's ever changing. So whatever you design, you know, will be out of date next year. There'll be some other thinking on this. So we provide like an introduction to those different perspectives, but a lot of our discussions are oriented around, okay, students, go do research, come bring in that perspective. Let's debate that. Let's unpack that together. Are there different ways to do that? And then when they get into their projects, they have to design a training for their project. They get to map that to if they're in the corporate world, or, you know, I taught an earlier version of the course. I had a student doing a training for truckers and another student doing like, you know, corporate leadership training. And so they're all bringing their own context, but they're also able to use some of the strategies that we've unpacked and choose among those while they're designing their final project. And creating communities of practice around this too, letting students find, you know, if there's other people in the corporate world or who are really interested in DEI, like giving them some breakout space to work together and support one another. And then at the very end, always bring back to your goals. You know, maybe there was a goal, something that surprised you that you didn't even expect to learn in this class, or maybe your goals have evolved. So bringing that back. So that's really like that's one example of letting students truly be partners and crafting the learning experience to what they need and care about, and supporting one another.
Thank you so much, Chelsie. As I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, do you ever get pushback from certain disciplines, or kind of this notion that it seems like that's going to take a lot of time, and I simply, you know, don't have that time? Do you find that you have conversations like that? And if so, what might be the angle of, you know, including that student choice in the course design, regardless of discipline?
Right. Well, I think that one thing that gives instructors anxiety is, oh, then I have to be you know, well, I know this one thing, and if I just make students do it the way I know, then I'm comfortable. But if you truly say, you don't have to have all the answers, that's okay. Your students are, you know, equal partners in this. Let them bring in their ideas. Let them, you know, have that choice. You don't have to, you know, be an expert in every single approach to this project, or, you know, I think that especially, and we're also working with graduate students, but I think this is true of undergraduates too, that they can be fairly empowered and self-aware. And I think students are getting, I think there's more awareness in teaching them metacognitive skills so that they learn how to be learners and what works for them. And, you know, students are, at least our students are very opinionated, and this is like what I want out of it. This isn't useful for me. This is, I have this other idea. And if you as the teacher can just be humble and just be like, I'm learning with you, that's great. Like, bring that in, let's try it out, willing to take risks. So just like Mandi was talking about, you have to like help them, if students take risks, help you, you know, her team is helping the instructors be okay with taking risks too, and going on this learning journey with their students.
And perhaps being vulnerable, right? It's all about, yeah, I'm on this journey as well. Thank you, Chelsie. And I think this segues beautifully into Benjamin's question, because I'm hearing resonate in my mind, Benjamin, that the statement that you made during the same presentation this last summer around, we want students to be experts in the field, right? They're coming, they're learning in higher education spaces. The goal is to become an expert so they can go out there and pursue whatever goals they have. So I'm curious, the question that I have for you that revolves around this concept is, you know, why can't students be in charge of their own learning? And how can we re-examine the notion of sage on the stage to help students deepen their understanding and critical thought and thinking when it comes to their learning? So how do we do that? Why can't they be in charge?
Yeah, it's kind of the age-old question. And as I was kind of thinking it over, our presentation that we gave, I kind of came to the understanding that what we like to do is kind of based around adult learning, of course, and with adult learning is basing what we teach around their experience. So the students' experiences are vitally important when it comes to their learning. I think for the most part, it can work in any learning environment, even with undergraduates. They can always benefit from tapping into a student's experience, but putting them in the driver's seat and making them responsible for their own learning, it can be a little bit tough, but I think that's kind of part of the fun behind instructional design and solving that puzzle with the subject matter expert. It's always kind of exciting to see what they can come up with you. But I think there's two examples that really spring to mind when it comes to implementing this idea that it's really about implementing the student's experience, really their life experience, and making them the sage on the stage, so to speak. So the first course that comes to mind, I believe I brought it up in that presentation. It was an arts and culture course. And students would pick an artist or someone within the art community that they were interested in. Be it because they were, you know, moved by that person's work, or that person affected the student's life in some way. And they were actually tasked with doing some research on the artist themselves. And then they actually were leading the discussion for that week. So they were actually interacting with their peers essentially as the instructor. And it seems to have proven very, very popular. The instructor came back to me. She was also the one that was the subject matter expert that I worked with. It seems to be very popular because it's giving those students, it is putting those students in the driver's seat, and they are being essentially responsible for their peers' learning, right, for that particular week. They felt much more engaged and willing to share their knowledge with peers. So just giving them basically the keys to the car and letting them drive is just one simple way to do that. And it's really linking it to their life experience. So that particular individual in the art community affected them in some way, and they're able to share that with their fellow students. It's a very simple way, but a very effective way of kind of letting them do the learning. Another one was, it's a UDL course, Universal Design for Learning course. And as Chelsie was saying, we're designing a lot of instructional design courses currently, and it is allowing us to kind of reflect on the things that we do and how we operate. But this particular course was interesting because the subject matter expert had a lot of really great ideas, and it was a lot of fun to work with the individual. And I think we came up with some really good ones, but in particular, actually, I should say before I go into that, if you're unaware, Universal Design for Learning, it's a very important instructional design concept. As she says in the course, she puts it pretty brilliantly. They are guidelines that ensure as many learners as possible with many different learning needs and preferences can equitably access, participate in, and demonstrate mastery within their learning environments. And I think that's a huge concept boiled down to one sentence, and she did a really great job of it. But the activity that the subject matter expert came up with in conjunction with, working with me. They're completing it in multiple weeks throughout the course. So in 1 week, they're doing what's we call the do it week, or I'm sorry, the explore it week. And then the following week, they're doing the do it week. So they explore a deep UDL concept. In one particular week, it's the principle of representation and accessible UDL. And then in the following, they're actually implementing it. So they implement that UDL principle of representation in the following week in some way. Now, the interesting thing that she came up with, and we both came up with, was how to actually convey that. So not only are they partaking in a discussion about that particular concept, whatever the explore it may be, and so they're able to kind of show their newfound expertise, but there's kind of an interesting, almost meta way of showcasing their newfound expertise. And rather than just submit a written post to the weekly discussion, they have the option of submitting a video, a flow chart, spreadsheet, anything as long as it's actually accessible to their peers. So if they do a video, for example, they'd have to caption it. So it's giving them that really hands-on, they're really getting their hands dirty and doing the heart of the content. But it also allows students to do what they're most comfortable with, right? So if a student's coming to the course with a lot of experience working in Excel, doing a spreadsheet, they can do a spreadsheet. Or if they have a lot of audio visual experience, well, then they can make a video. So it's really, again, tapping into what they know, what their experience is, and what they've kind of can bring to the table, not only for themselves and enriching the course for themselves, but also for their fellow peers. So I think that's kind of what made me think, what is at the heart of what we presented on. And I really think at its core, it's about enriching that student experience with their own life experiences. How can we do that? So that was it.
Thanks, Benjamin. I really appreciated the examples around solidifying that learning for the student, being, okay, not only maybe are you going to be the sage on the stage student and teach your peers, but also the component of do it. So they're actively engaging with that learning to help solidify that expertise within themselves. So I appreciate that. And once again, beautifully moves into the question that I have for Kerry, which centers around, of course, the presentation that the three of you conducted last summer and cueing into a student's own expertise, Kerry, and preferred way of learning as well. We've touched on that in addition to many other great things, is how students are learning and how can they display that learning, all the while understanding the different forms of expertise and learning that might be happening and taking place within the classroom or the online environment. So really, I'm curious to learn more about this idea of tapping into the student's expertise and how do you intentionally, as an instructor, craft assignments that create space for interpersonal skills and metacognition, a word that we've heard throughout the presentation today. So Kerry, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I feel like I got sort of the soft pitch because everyone else has talked about creating space and having students share their experience and yeah, again, that like being really intentional. So I'm not going to rehash that. All of those things still apply. But one of the things that I found as a designer that can be really challenging, but also can really be really energizing is thinking through what experience do I want students to have in my classroom, but then also what memorable experience do I want students to walk away from? And in an online class, those online learning experiences can often look the same. We sort of know the tropes, which is, well, maybe they're going to do a group project, or maybe we're going to just do a class discussion where we ask them to share their experiences, or we ask them to make a connection about their experiences. But we never actually say, like, what are they going to do together that's an actual memory that they form that's not just typing into a box. And so asking yourself the question as an instructor, and again, as a designer, asking the instructor that question, what kind of experience do you want a student to have? And then saying, okay, let's create an opportunity for them to have that experience. But then sort of, okay, what am I going to assess? What are the students actually going to produce as a result of this experience? That's where you can get into that metacognition piece, where it's instead of having the students write you a paper about a concept, it's have a student experience the concept and then reflect for you about that experience. So to make that a little bit more practical, I know that that's sort of pie in the sky. I was working on a course for our natural resource management program. And one of the things that happens when you're working in natural resource management is you have folks who come into natural resource management who are very idealistic, who tend to be a little bit more left-leaning, who are, diehard, love the environment, environmentalists, which is phenomenal and fantastic. But then they go out and they have to create partnerships with landowners, with small communities, with small towns. And they might find that those folks don't necessarily share their political opinions. And the instructor I was working with says that can be very shocking and it can be pretty difficult. So we thought about, okay, we want students to be able to have an experience where they have to co-create something with somebody who doesn't agree with them, who maybe doesn't share their goals, or at least doesn't necessarily have the same concrete goals that they have. And how can we have them have that experience? We could have had them just write a paper about like, what are some strategies to have negotiation, but that's kind of boring. So we ended up designing a game where all of the students had different outcomes, and it was possible for the entire group to win the game. It was possible for the entire group to lose the game. It was possible for certain individuals to win and certain individuals to lose. But the idea was they all had to build something together. And then the actual assignment was they had to reflect on what strategies they used. So the advantage of this type of thing is that everyone is having an experience together. So when we're asking students to bring their own experiences to the table, that's great. And we love incorporating those things. But you might have students who are career changers who don't necessarily have a specific or concrete relevant experience to bring to the table. And they might suffer, as Mandi said, from that imposter syndrome, like, I'm a career changer. I don't know if I have anything to bring to the table. But that shared experience lets students be an expert on their own experience. It lets them incorporate course content, and then it lets them reflect back on how they solved those problems with the knowledge that they had. So it really can bring all those things together. So just to summarize, again, thinking through what kind of experience you want students to have, and then thinking about how you can help students have that experience and then reflect on that experience as the learning product that they produce for you.
Kerry, thank you for weaving all of those together so beautifully. I really appreciate that. And it, again, helps us think about the student perspective and how it can help the instructor as well in that course design, and to incorporate that instead of thinking that they can't possibly have the expertise, because oftentimes they do. And more instructors are recognizing that, and there's great work being done. And it's always beneficial to learn about other opportunities to incorporate within the classroom. Wonderful. Panelists, thank you. That was such an illuminating discussion, and I want to talk more, but I want to bring in our COLTT community here that's joined us. So what I would love to have happen is for JC to drop into the chat a link to a Google Doc. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want all of you to be able to walk away with something to continue the conversation, to continue the resource sharing after we're done today. So the link within the chat will take you to a Google Doc, and I will share my screen here shortly because I'd love for all of you to participate in any way that you feel comfortable, whether that's writing here within the Google Doc or posting in the chat or unmuting yourself and asking a question, raising your hand so we can see that you want to ask a question. Again, however you feel comfortable, but we want to make sure that we can continue the conversation after we're done here today. I've also created a Slack channel, which can provide an opportunity for us to continue the conversation as well. And JC, thank you so much for posting that in the chat. If you are so inclined to join us in chat or in Slack, please feel free to do that. So let me go ahead and share my screen here so we can all see the Google Doc. And again, no wrong questions or resources to share. This is all an opportunity for us to get vulnerable, perhaps, or to share our respective expertise to the rest of the COLTT community. And what I'd like to do is, I'll just scroll down here. We have a couple of different headers here Number one being resources to share. Number two, ideas, thoughts to share. And then the third one being questions to share. So if you find an area that you would like to make some notes under, please feel free to do that. I see it happening now. This is wonderful. This is glorious. Any questions that folks would like to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself. And panelists, if you see a question or a thought being shared here, please feel free to chime in.
I see somebody writing about gathering feedback. You'd be using Flipgrid, have some anecdotal feedback, but kind of want to get more evaluation or self-reporting. I think that's a thing that's important and something we've been thinking a lot too. Like, how can we get feedback on whether these cool things we think are great that we're putting in the courses are really what students want, and or if they have other ideas. And because I think, you know, we make a lot of assumptions about our students, and like I was saying, students, they're more self-aware than we think. So getting that from students is something I think all institutions are struggling with, and it's an important thing to put there. Kara. I forgot your name there.
We've also, somebody posted in there having students moderate, where did it go? There's so many things that got pasted in here, but about having students moderate or teach. We've also been experimenting with that in our online only courses. It can be a little bit more challenging just from the technology standpoint, but that is something that we're excited to see how that goes. Also, we have offered synchronous and asynchronous options. And during the pandemic, that choice was very popular with students. But now that people's schedules are starting to get back to normal, it's been really interesting to see how students in surveys say they want those options. And then when we give them to them, they want them less. It's just, so it's been interesting to see how that continues to evolve with people's schedules. I do agree that we should offer them the choice. I'm always pushing for it, even if they complain about it.
I love that somebody put like the learning profiles on there using Padlet, or I forget what the other one that was up there, tool that they use. We use Padlet to use some things on there, or Pictochart. It just sets the tone, even if I mean, ideally advanced, you know, UDL and belonging would be that you create a whole series of activities and stuff that continues to let them bring in themselves. But even if you just set the tone early on with, you are not an empty vessel, tell me who you are, what you're bringing. You know, we always ask the question too, how can you support other learners in this class? You know, what do you have to offer that they can learn from you? Even if it's just, I'm coming at this with fresh eyes. I know nothing. I have no assumptions. That's a valuable perspective to bring too. So just setting that stage that like you are part of this community, I think gives them more ownership. And like you were saying, Kate, a lot of instructors are worried that that's more work for them, but actually you want students to be more active and put, you know, that on students to bring more to the classroom. So they're not just passive and you're not pulling teeth all the time to try to drag them along. They'll be more excited and more engaged in the course if they feel like they're full participants.
I also think about, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sara.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about all this environment. If you're in a spectrum, I have my economics colleagues on one extreme and you guys are in the other. You are like, oh, belonging and all these activities. Let me be the devil's advocate. Why would I want them to have a memory for these students? Why? When I can teach welfare, coding, simultaneous equations to solve climate change, why do I want to invest in these guys interacting with each other and having a memory about interacting with people who are conservatives? Why? And I think that there's a key here called retrieval practice. And this is very well researched in physics and biology, that you learn when you retrieve the information and apply it to something. And this can work for math, for physics, and I'm sure for every other discipline as well. It's important for these interactions to take place because they build on your understanding and you learn better. That's one thing that I wanted to share. And the other thing also from research is the fact that an early intervention, it's much better than a later intervention trying to shift the perspective. If we didn't start, caring about each other, and we were just like the approach that we have in certain institutions in the econ department, that we say, you know what, we have so many students, we want to get rid of them. I mean, this success of students, nah, we don't care about that. We don't care. We just want the best. We just want the ones who are tough, core. And then we want to shift into we care about you. It's going to be hard. But if we start from the beginning, well, that sets the course of action, right? Where we start, where we're going to land in the long run.
And I was just going to add, I noticed something in here about a buddy system for if there's like on campus and online work happening. One of a workshop that we gave once around students connecting like that, and to address the whole like imposter syndrome thing, is to ask students to go through the syllabus together. Like you can partner them up in your course and ask them to go through the syllabus together to identify what things you think are going to be easy for you in this course, what things are going to be challenging for you, so that they can, first of all, they look through the entire syllabus and they take a look at all the things that they're going to be doing in the course, and be able to, instead of panicking and not wanting to do something in the course because they think they're not ready for it, or they don't have the background information, that they can work through that together with another partner in the class. And that again creates that sense of belonging, and that care about, we can address those things if you find challenges, we can address those things if, or you can help one of your teammates or your classmates if you think something's going to be easy for you, you can help them through that situation. And so just making space for those types of things for your students, again, creates that sense of caring and belonging for them.
And panelists, thank you so much, both Sara and Mandi, for those thoughts. I wanted to draw our attention, and forgive me for the scrolling, I hope I'm not making anyone dizzy. But I'm curious, panelists, if we can zero in on some of these questions and answer, try to get these questions answered, and or expand on perhaps a response you've already given if you feel that answers the question. But I'd love to get some of these questions answered.
Sure. Well, while the rest of you are reading the rest of the questions, I can jump in on the first one. I think it launches off of what Sara and Mandi were talking about, like, how do you get your colleagues to jump on the bandwagon here and to care? It's not just sink or swim, but I do think peer pressure, like that first question is saying, what are other people doing in this field? If you can showcase, hey, this is what these other instructors are doing. And I do think that they are very like discipline specific. You might be like, oh, the folks in natural resource management are doing that. People are in the humanities are like, that has nothing to do with me, so I think there are disciplinary boundaries. So if you can kind of give exemplars from their own discipline, that helps. And Kara posted in the chat some resources like, researching. I think that just generally these kind of practices mattering and being serious and rigorous and important is a case that we have to constantly make. And we're making some headway on. But we do, Mandi, it runs our teaching excellence program. It's a professional development program. And so we'll bring in different instructors to showcase what they're doing, what they care about, how it's working in their class. And I think that resonates a lot more than coming just from our team being like, well, best practice shows, but to be like, oh, if students are taking a class with that person, they're doing this, my class is going to look terrible in comparison. That's a motivator. But also I think, especially in some of those disciplines where like medicine, that's just like weeding out, what a shame it is for the medical field that what they think they're doing is filtering the best and brightest, but actually you're not, you're just filtering people who like already know and think the way you do, right? It's not, and you're filtering out brilliant people who could change and evolve the field, but they just aren't like already fixed in those patterns from their like private high school or whatever, and so thinking about, right, what is a way to enable everyone to be successful and show up in different ways? you know, sure, not everybody can go on to be a doctor, of course, but you want to at least bring everyone up to a level playing field so you can see the richness of like what's possible for them. Making that case might help too.
And I think I can address that second question about more information on Padlet and Flipgrid and how much detail using these products in the assignment. With Padlet, that's more of a, some instructors use it, not everybody does. And we have an introductory discussion like for all of our courses for students to introduce themselves to the course. Some instructors use Padlet and there's other ones like I think I mentioned ThingLink, PictoChart, a few of those. So in the discussion prompt, it just prompts students to create a learning profile with some certain questions. And we give them links to each of these different tech tools. That just say use one of these to create a learning profile to share with everyone. And so students use that, at least in my course specifically, I use it in that introductory discussion. Flipgrid we use, there's a few of our courses that Flipgrid is used as a discussion prompt. However, Flipgrid in Canvas, it can't go in there as a discussion because the LTI won't connect with an actual discussion board. It has to be in there as an assignment that is a discussion board. So Flipgrid is just the, you know, the video grid platform, video platform. So when students are in there in the assignment, it shows up, you can see everybody's video at once. And it's a great way for students to just record short little clips, and it doesn't, it's a little more set up on the instructor end, but for student usability, it's actually very easy once it is set up in Canvas and integrated correctly. Then students, like they just have to click the button in that assignment. So it's can be fairly easy to use if your instructors are pretty technologically savvy.
Excellent.
I can tackle that next. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Actually, I was going to leave you in, Kerry and Benjamin, to maybe think through these next two, given your perspectives.
Yeah, I can talk more about promoting self-assessment and reflection. I mean, there obviously are, this is going to be different, but depending on what kind of assignment you're talking about or what assessment you're talking about. But, you know, students can read and see the rubrics as well. I mean, that would be a pretty straightforward way. Say, here, look at the rubric and see how you would grade yourself based on your performance. Also having students reflect on their experience doing the assignment. One of the things that we've done in Canvas is like, there's a little bubble that's like got a comment box. It's like in the comments, write 4 sentences about your key takeaways. I as a student have also had instructors say in the final paragraph of your assignment, also discuss what you learned or what was surprising to you. In a slightly different tack, we have a whole, you know, programming and software development concentration. We also have our Global Information Systems program. In both of those programs, there are some assignments where it's like, you kind of either did it correctly or you didn't. Like either your program works or it does not. And so it can be very difficult to have students show their work. In that, it's like, well, your thing works, great. But what I really want to know about is what problems did you encounter? How did you solve them? What resources did you look at in order to overcome these obstacles that I know that you faced in order to get this thing to work? So we actually require students to submit a 300-word reflection with those kinds of assignments that says, think about your problem solving process. What worked this time? What didn't work this time? What tools did you reuse from the previous time you had to solve this problem? So having students, again, think through what was my strategy? What was my approach? Did it work? Did it not work? Why not? So again, just asking students to do that kind of reflecting and thinking about that next level up or the next level deeper, and including that in your assignment, including that in your rubric.
Thank you. That was my question. So, you know, I do have them do this like right after like midterms and stuff, because that's when they're the most disappointed. And, you know, in discussion boards, but I've been kind of like thinking how I can make them think about this every like other week, maybe. So.
Yeah, in those same courses, we also just sometimes straight up have discussions that are like, what are your problem solving strategies? Like, what are your problem solving strategies at the beginning versus what are your problem solving strategies at the end? If your problem solving strategy is always, I email the instructor, that's maybe not going to work for you when you get into the professional world. It could be ask your supervisor, but it could also be go look on GitHub, go ask the internet, ask a colleague. So having them think through how their strategies evolve over the course is also really helpful.
Excellent. I know we just have a few moments left. Benjamin, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add on anything to those two questions.
Yeah, I was going to say the last one is a really good one, and it is tough to think about. You're handing everything over to the students, but as long as you give enough guidance, I would say doing something like I recommended to the subject matter expert for we'll just say for the arts and culture course, when she basically had the students moderate the discussions for that week. At the very beginning of the course, I kind of recommended, in the instructor notes, have a weekly announcement or this week's announcement explaining in as much detail as you can give what you're expecting out of that discussion board. And in addition to that, you're kind of going to it's going to be a little bit more legwork on your part. You'll be a little bit of like I guess kind of like a shadow moderator. You'll be there in the background, but not really. I mean, you'll have to step in, obviously, if things kind of start to spin out of control a little bit, but for the most part, she's seen really positive reactions to those discussion boards and a lot of really positive engagement. So at some point, it's just about, you give them as much guidance as you can give, and then you step in when necessary, but not too much. You want it to be known to the student who's kind of the instructor for the week that they're the authority. They are the sage on the stage, if you will, and they're kind of in control of the learning. But with you always in the background. And then I'd say, at what point do instructors give students the reins and when should they provide guidance? Yeah, I guess that's just the biggest thing is it does take a little bit more work in terms of if you are handing the reins over. But I think it's so much more fruitful of an experience for students when they are able to express themselves based upon their own life experiences and tie it to the content. So.
Excellent. Well, I just want to share my sincerest gratitude for all the panelists for sharing their time today with us and for all of you joining us, the COLTT community. And I really am grateful for this conversation. It's been beneficial to me. I've learned a bunch and I hope all of you have as well. Quickly, I want to mention that there is a link to a survey in the chat. I hope that I am not, can you see this screen? I'm sorry, I'm pulling up a slide, a thank you slide. So I'm not sure it's saying my screen is paused. I'm gonna stop share really quick. Anyway, there should be a link to the survey. We would love your feedback, of course. And a big thank you to JC for helping in the chat. JC, I'm not sure if there's anything that we needed to address from the chat.
Nope, nothing here.
Okay, wonderful. Well, again, I am grateful for all of you and your time today. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, COLTT community. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Well, I learned things from you too.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.